All right, we're going to look at solving quadratics, and we're going to look at solving them two ways today. And so there is a flow chart for solving. There is a flow chart for factoring. Like, what do I try first? What do I try second? This is not exactly a how to solve procedure. This is what do I try first? Okay, first, if there is 1x, now we're solving for x. If there is 1x, isolate it. Now we are talking about quadratics, okay? So this is typically an x squared. Usually when you isolate x, you are doing your PEMDAS skills or SADMEP, which is backwards. Usually when you solve, you do PEMDAS backwards. I will give you an example of that. Okay. If I can't isolate x, okay, if the quadratic factors, which we've been practicing our factoring, okay? So if the quadratic factors, we will use the zero product property. A lot of people ask me vocab that was on the PSATs, which is why we mentioned vocab in this class, because sometimes it comes up, okay? Zero product property says if A times B equals 0, if two things multiplied together equals 0, then A equals 0 or B equals 0. If I'm going to multiply two things together and the outcome is 0, one of those two things has to be 0. It's like the multiplicative identity. You multiply by 1, okay? This is the 0 multiply product, right? What happens when you multiply by 0? You get 0. So either A or B has to be 0, okay? We're going to put a number 3 on this list. But that's really our next topic, but it goes in this list. If the quadratic doesn't factor, we use something called, does anyone know how you would solve if, like, you can't factor? Yeah? Quadratic formula. However, in Algebra 1 you do quadratic formula. In this class, we do something called complete the square, which is related to the quadratic formula. Okay? It's just a step up. Complete the square. Notice that completing the square is its own separate topic because there's a lot that goes with it. Okay. Here's our focus for today. If we can isolate x, we're going to do it. If we can factor it, we're going to do that. But we're going to always start with the number 1. We're going to try that first. If that doesn't work, then we're going to try the second thing here. All right. Let's do it. Sample 1. Solve for x. 9x squared minus 6x plus 1. Okay. Is there 1x? No. I see 2 of them. Okay, so I can't isolate x. Next on my list, if the quadratic factors. Okay, well, let's try to factor. All right, so I notice that the 1 is the prime number, so I'm going to put those ones down. And it appears as though they both need to be negative so that I can add to a negative 6. And I'm pretty certain that it's going to be the 3, 3 and the 1, 1 here. And I'm going to check it. Yes. Okay. If the factors use the zero product property, okay, well, it's kind of important to do the zero product property that it's equal to 0. If the factors are equal to 0, then either the first factor or the second factor will be 0. Okay, solve for x, right? We're still trying to solve for x. Now that I've broken this up into something smaller, I can add 1 and divide by 3. How many answers did I get? Technically 1 answer, but it showed up twice, right? 1 per factor. And so x equals 1/3. And I'm going to put some vocabulary words with it. I'm going to say double because it showed up twice. I'm going to call it a real number because it's not imaginary, right? It's on the number line. And I'm going to give it one more word. Rational. Because the answer is a ratio of integers. Okay, let's do another one. My list says, if there is only one x, isolate x. How many x's are there? 1. Let's isolate x. All right, this is like your worksheet 2 from the very beginning. Square roots, isolate x. Square root, okay, x equals plus or minus root and I got x equals, but I'm not done. What do I do with that radical? Yes, Sarah? Yeah, rationalize it by doing this. Okay. Don't forget that plus or minus, so we get root 2 over 2. Okay. So there are, actually I should say, there's one double, right? One answer, but it's a double. Here there are 2 real numbers. I don't know what root 2 is, but I know it's a number on the number line. This has another category, though. Is this a ratio of integers? No. The radical is not an integer, and so we call this not rational. Here is for not being a ratio of integers. There you go. Just introducing the vocab. When you have your quiz, it's just going to be solving. Yes. Okay, it's important that I said one double solution because I have one number. It just showed up twice. Here, I have two answers. One was positive and one was negative. Two real, irrational. Now, the reason there's an arrow here is that both of these numbers are real, but it's a subcategory. All right, let's turn our page. Let's do a few more. Number 3. 8x squared minus 8x equals 6. Okay. Flowchart. Is there one x? No. Can you factor it? Hopefully, yes. Try it. Now, keep in mind, if you're trying to factor, you might want to put that whole quadratic on one side. When you get to factoring, you have your own flowchart of things you need to do. What do you do first to factor? Don't yell it. Raise your hand. Yeah? GCF. Right? GCF first. Okay, try it. Okay, so I saw a lot of people got your GCF of 2. Now, because I'm focusing on factoring right now, I'm just going to do this. Because I was trying to factor it, so I'm factoring it. You may have just divided by 2. It's fine. Okay? Now, I try to factor. Now I notice that 3 is prime. I'm going to have to use 1 and 3. Which one is negative and why? Yes?
The second one is negative because in order to get negative 4, when you multiply it by 2, you need that one to be negative.
Okay, so she is saying when you multiply by 2, so I'm assuming you picked here, so you get 6 and 2. Okay, so but I need the 6 to be negative. Yes. More general. Yes? When the negative's in the middle, the bigger number has to be negative. It's like one of the first things you learn in factoring in Algebra 1 is like, how do I pick my pluses and minuses? Okay, we'll ignore that 4 in front. If the middle number is negative, the bigger number has to be negative. Now, it's one of each because this is negative. Yes, nice. Okay, so we get 2x plus 1. 2x minus 3, but I'm going to write down all of my factors here. And I'm going to check it. 4x squared minus 6x plus 2x minus 3. Good. If I can factor it, Then I use the zero product property, which means one of these factors is 0. Now notice I took 2 as a factor. Anything you multiply, guys, is a factor. Except that 2 equals 0 has no solution. It's a false statement. Okay. X equals minus 1/2. X equals positive 3/2. Okay, so there are 2 real, rational solutions. There should always be 2 solutions because it's a quadratic. Okay, 1 more, maybe 2 more. Okay, looks a little different. Add some grouping symbols. Is there 1x? How many times did you write the letter X? Once. So isolate it. Now, the grouping symbols are kind of like absolute value. You might need to work on the outside of those grouping symbols before you get to the X. Okay, so we're going to minus 1 and divide by 4. Think of your absolute value, how you had to undo everything outside of it before you got to the absolute value. Well, the square, if I'm thinking of my PEMDAS, adding and subtracting, multiply, divide, then I get to the exponent. Okay, so I need to subtract 1, and then I'm going to divide by 4. Just give myself a little more room. Minus 1, divide by 4. Square root. Okay, square root. What's happening here is we're combining a lot of skills. X plus 1 equals. Can you simplify this radical? It's a question for you. Can you simplify that radical? You can. Take a minute. Try to simplify this radical. If it helps, you can think of it with a radical around each of those numbers. Who wants to be brave and share with me what you get? Yes?
Is it I over 2?
It is I over 2. Yes. I'm gonna say, I think there's candy right down there. You go grab a piece. It's on the bottom shelf. Okay. I for the negative 1 in the radical, 2 for the root 4. But x is not by itself yet. Means you're not done. How can I get x by itself? Subtract 1. Okay, now plus or minus I over 2 minus 1. Are these things like terms? No, means you can't actually add them together. It's imaginary. How should I write imaginary numbers? In standard form. So I'm going to put my negative 1 first. I'm going to leave my plus or minus here. Okay. That's it. That's the answer. Is it wrong to write it like this? No. but I see the I, so I'm going to write it with the real part and then the imaginary part. I am going to do this just so that you can see it. There are two answers here. One is for the plus I over 2. One of them is for the minus I over 2. It's the air from the window. Yeah.
Oh, when we're writing like on the test, do you want us to write out both
No,
of the answers?
this is totally fine. I'm just showing you that it would split over the plus or minus. Okay, let's use our vocab words. There are 2. Are they real? No. Complex solutions. Sometimes instead of complex, you can say imaginary. Imaginary. Those two words are often exchanged, right? One or the other. You don't have to choose from either of them. You would get one or the other to choose from. There are 2 imaginary solutions. That's it. There's no more words to describe that. One. Last one right here. Okay. 2, 3x plus 1 squared minus 8 equals 0. Okay, there you go. Solve for x. Okay. My x is hiding inside those grouping symbols, but I only see one of them. So I'm going to try to isolate it. Work my way outside in. It's like round 1. Okay. Square root. Kind of nice. I know what the square root, well, plus or minus. Now, square root of 4 is actually just 2. Okay. This is where it might get a little bit tricky because I feel like I want a minus 1, but like what do I minus 1 from? Positive 2 or negative 2. Because they're like terms, you might consider, like absolute value, solving 1 for the negative side and 1 for the positive side. Only with the I, it didn't matter because there were no like terms to combine. But here, I was about to minus 1, but minus 1 from what? Plus 2 or negative 2? Well, you would need to do it for both of them, but you're going to get different answers. So when I minus 1 here, I get negative 3, which turns into negative 1. And here when I minus 1, I get 1. And so in this particular case, I have 2 real, rational solutions. Negative 1 and positive 1/3.